Please won't you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts together find their way into the heart of God this morning. Amen. Hi, everyone. We're getting stronger and stronger every week, aren't we? I can almost feel us returning to health. Do you know what I mean? Like, we just look like we're returning to health. Welcome to all of you who are joining us in the sanctuary. Welcome to those of you who are watching us online. We are still together apart, and we are growing. We're growing and healing, and we're returning, and we're getting vaccinated, right? Good morning to the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Some of our eldest members are now our healthiest. Isn't that right? Janet is like, yeah. We belong to each other. We belong to each other. And so we are responsible for each other's safekeeping. Isn't that right? We are unquestionably wounded by the trauma of this year because we are all a part of one body. We are wounded together. But our healing is also collective, right? Just like our woundedness is. Just like our woundedness is. And we are seeing this literally as together we try to achieve herd immunity from COVID-19 with a worldwide vaccination program, right? I saw somebody online that was like at Gillette Stadium getting vaccinated a couple of days ago, and they said something like, I liked that I was at Gillette Stadium because I felt like I was part of this like collective, gigantic, worldwide effort, you know? Which is a nicer way of looking at these mass vaccination sites that are giving everybody so many problems, right? Like to be part of that collective action is really on display when you are at Gillette Stadium. Amen? Yeah. We are truly all in this together. It is terrifying and it is beautiful, just like it has been from the beginning. So did you hear about the vaccine angels from our church? No? We have, well, I'm going to tell you about them, so it doesn't matter if you haven't heard about them. We have two beloveds from here in Sterling, actually Sterling Townies, part of this church, who have camped out for days on the Massachusetts vaccine websites like it's Ticketmaster. Megan Marshall and Kristen Nelson are this month's pandemic heroes. They are signing up everyone we hear about that is having trouble getting a vaccine appointment in our community. Just anytime we hear about it online somewhere, we find them, we connect them to Kristen and Megan, they call them immediately. They both have full-time jobs in law and in higher education, respectively, but they've stopped everything to make community health their number one job and priority. When they run out of people to vaccinate, they call me asking for more people, and together we look up phone numbers in the church directory and we contact people for their information, and the two of them just like stalk all of the vaccine websites until our folks get an appointment. And they have found vaccine appointments for every single person that has asked them to. Isn't that amazing? I don't know how many it is. I need to ask them how many people they have done this for so far, but it is absolutely astounding. We will get First Church herd immunity faster because of them. We really will. So please won't you join me in showering Kristen and Megan with thanks and praise? Will you do that? Yes. Woo! I hope they're watching. I hope they're watching. You know how this pandemic has been sort of a a trade-off, like you're in a marathon and you're running along and passing the baton. I talked to Kristen, and she said, this is the first thing I've done all pandemic to be helpful. Like, this is my thing. You know how, like, we all have, like, tried to find a thing, and we pass the baton when we get tired to the next person, and they take their thing? That's what Kristen's doing. So, like, if you guys all feel like, oh, God, I haven't done anything, like that to help the community. Kristen hadn't either until this week, I mean, not everybody can be Jen and start a food program and hand out 19,000 meals on the street, but some people are really good at sitting in front of the internet like it's Ticketmaster, like everybody has a role, and we just pass the baton, right? Okay. We will not heal the world by going to church. We will heal the world by being the church, right? Unfortunately, going to church isn't always easy, especially right now, which is why COVID-19 has been an interesting gift for so many of us. Many of us are safer at home, and not just from the contagion of deadly pathogens. Online, we can just show up as we are, right? Anxious and afraid, exhausted from chemo treatments, unable to get out of bed, maybe still in our pajamas, last night's makeup still smeared across our faces, still a little drunk from the night before maybe, right? We just show up as we are. So for those of you who took a shower and put on real pants and came here this morning, your job was hard, right? Online, no one is taking attendance, and no one has to see what we look like if we are crying into our coffee mugs. And no one needs to know that our marriage is falling apart, or that we lost another job, or that we are anxious to ever be in public spaces again, right? And our kids do not have to be in yet another stressful social situation that they may fail at. At home, we are safe from communicable, potentially deadly diseases too, right? At home, we are also safe from judgment. Some of our most deadly spiritual wounds were inflicted by the Christian church itself. Holly, my friend from high school, told me this story yesterday that truly made me ill as a religious leader and the daughter of a Vietnam veteran. We were both daughters of Vietnam veterans. She said that when my dad came back from the war full of shrapnel and without part of his foot from a traumatic Claymore mine attack, he was visited in his rehab hospital by a clergyman who told him that he was a murderer and sinner and would never be forgiven. From then on, he had horrific nightmares of being in a football stadium, being booed and shamed by priests, all chanting, "Sinner, sinner." He never went to church again, despite being a Christian in his heart. I wouldn't have gone to church again either, would you? Over the years, I have heard so many people's stories of wounds inflicted directly by churches, like Holly's story. And they shock me every time, but they do not surprise me. If the church were Christian, mirroring the compassion of Jesus would be more important than echoing the orthodoxy built up around him. But the church doesn't always act like Christians. The church is meant to be Jesus' hospital, a place of utter shamelessness, a place for the wounded to heal. Jesus would have healed Holly's father. Jesus would have bound up his wounds and reminded him of his preciousness to God. The church rejected him instead, not Jesus. Anne Voskamp, in her book, The Broken Way, describes what it was like to have mental illness trivialized from the pulpit as someone who identified with similar struggles. She says, "I was 18 with scars across my wrists when I'd heard a pastor tell a whole congregation that he had once lived next to a loony bin. I'd looked at the floor when everyone laughed. They didn't know how I had left my only mama behind the locked doors of psychiatric wards more than a few times. When they laughed, I felt the blood drain from my face, and I'd wanted to stand up and howl. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I'd wanted to stand up and beg. When the church isn't for the suffering and broken, then the church isn't for Christ. Because Jesus, with his pierced side, is always on the side of the broken. Jesus always moves into places moved with grief. Jesus always seeks out where the suffering is, and that's where Jesus stays. The wound in his side proves that Jesus is always on the side of the suffering, the wounded, the busted, the broken. Jesus always moves into places moved with grief and stays there. So in our gospel text today, a centurion, which is another word for a Roman soldier, is moved with grief and asks Jesus for his help on behalf of his servant, who is very, very ill. Paralyzed. Jesus recognizes and is impressed by the special spiritual gifts the soldier has. Because of his service in the military and his rank and authority within it, the centurion understands and respects hierarchy. He doesn't even come to Jesus directly because he feels he is unworthy to be under Jesus' own roof. So he sends others in his stead to ask for a healing of his servant. In fact, the text says that Jesus is, quote, amazed by this soldier's faith. And it's the only time that Jesus ever says that he is amazed by anyone's faith in all of the scriptures. So it is significant. The Roman soldier was one of the most unlikely people to amaze Jesus, right? He was a Gentile. He had a pagan upbringing. He was a Roman stationed in Palestine to subject the Jews to the emperor's rule. He was a man of war. He achieved the rank of centurion by distinguishing himself above others in the brutal Roman martial arts. Eventually, it is Roman soldiers who will arrest Jesus and bring him to jail, where he lives the rest of his life as a death row inmate until his crucifixion, right? The Roman soldier asking for Jesus' help played for the wrong team. He was not on Jesus' side, but Jesus was on his. Jesus is always on the side of the suffering, the wounded, the busted, the broken. The centurion's faith in Jesus' power is so strong that he believes Jesus can heal even from afar. And Jesus is astounded by both the soldier's humility and his desire to care for people far below his rank. Jesus doesn't chant, "Sinner, sinner," at him. He says, "Not even in Israel have I found such faith." Instead of being repelled, Jesus is amazed. He didn't just heal the literal wounds of the centurion's servant, therefore, he healed the wounds of separation between him and the Roman soldier. I was listening to an interview this week with Brad Galloway, who's an ex-neo-Nazi who works for the group Life After Hate. He was talking about the Proud Boys on some NPR show I was listening to. So I looked him up on the internet, and I found an article about him in Playboy magazine, which I only read for the articles. You have to cite your sources, when you're preaching. So don't tell anybody I said Playboy in church. Deborah John Lee writes this. In his 13 years deep within skinhead subculture, Brad Galloway brawled in dozens of street fights. He'd emerged bloodied from 75-person malaise, feeling like a good soldier, ideology unshaken, until one brutal encounter in his early 20s. It was nighttime. Galloway and a fellow skinhead were walking down a street in the Parkdale neighborhood of Toronto, jackets open to swastika emblazoned shirts, and they ran into two members of a rival Vietnamese neighborhood gang. When a fight broke out between the pairs, about 40 from the rival gang sprang from a nearby restaurant. The beatdown was so fierce, Galloway doesn't remember much. Belts with knives slashed him, boots pummeled his ribs, blows from every direction, then everything went black. When he came to, he saw bright hospital lights, his swastika shirt stained with blood, and an Orthodox Jewish doctor walking through the door. He was a Hasidic Jew, Galloway recalls in an interview. Beard, hat, sideburns. I couldn't believe this was happening. At the sight of Galloway's skinhead uniform, I thought he would leave the room, but he didn't. He said, "I'm here to help you," Galloway remembers. He didn't have a sick look on his face. He just saw a person in distress who needed help. As the doctor stitched him up, he explained that Galloway had lost so much blood, he was within 6 hours of dying. He left the hospital having been treated for a broken arm, a skull fracture, and bruises and cuts all over his body. But he also left with an indelible memory of this doctor's compassion, which Galloway knew that he did not deserve. Though it would take years, this encounter marked a turning point in Galloway's life and has played a critical role in his long journey toward de-radicalizing from the white power skinhead movement that he had come to lead on an international scale. When I was listening to this interview with him, the thing that really struck me was that the interviewer asked, "Did you ever tell the doctor about how you changed?" And he said, "No, I never did. At first I was ashamed. And now that I've been out so long, I just don't want to burden him with the having to remember me." And the interviewer burst into tears and said, I think he would want to know, and asked him if he would call him. It was really powerful. This is why I looked him up and found this article. When the doctor saved Brad Galloway's life, he also started him on a trajectory to healing his soul. And he should know this, right? He's left with an indelible memory of this doctor's compassion, which he did not deserve. Grace heals like that. Brad Galloway went on to heal others like him, too, who fell prey to these dangerous ideologies in Life After Hate, which is this organization that works to deprogram white supremacists. He is emboldened by that encounter enough to heal. This is as brave an act of faith that I can think of. Similarly, it's rather bold to approach Jesus with the assumption that he will grant you the authority and the ability to heal a paralyzed man when you play for the wrong team. But the centurion does just that. His boldness was an enactment of his faith, and Jesus responds to it by healing. In granting his request, Jesus is again transcending cultural boundaries in extraordinary ways. Like the neo-Nazi dying from his wounds in the hands of a Jewish doctor, this army commander should be Jesus' enemy, but the soldier has the faithful audacity and also humility to put himself in the hands of a Jewish doctor too, right? The servant for whom he is advocating is a Gentile and a slave too, the ultimate nobody. And none of this matters to Jesus, none of it. Jesus is always on the side of the suffering, the wounded, the busted, and the broken. To Jesus, there are no enemies, there are no nobodies. Jesus is interested only in healing, not judging who is worthy of it. Elizabeth Spellman says that repair is the creative destruction of brokenness. And the beauty of all of this is that God doesn't see any of us as expendable or beyond repair. You and I may not know how to heal. We may not know how to heal sickness or relationships or division or the world torn asunder, but God does. God doesn't throw us away. God continually repairs and reinforces us until we are strong at the broken places. And then God gives us to one another for safekeeping. God gathers us from the east and the west and brings us together around one table where love heals all wounds. So, beloved, the church can be a place of judgment, but it should be a place of healing. And it can be a place of healing because we have each other. Alone, we can do so little. And together, we can do so much. Like the centurion, we need to be bold enough to ask for help. Like Jesus, we need to be in the business of repair, restoration, and reinforcement. Like God, we need to be in the business of gathering the lost. The only antidote to trauma is connection. Together, we have everything. Together, we can gather up the fragments so that nothing and no one is lost. Amen.